To the Point with your host, News Channel 5's Kelly Dunn.
Bob Graham is one of Florida's most respected and liked politicians. He served 2 terms as governor in the 1980s, followed by 3 terms in the U.S. Senate.
Now Bob Graham is taking on the role of statesman, and he is our guest today on To the Point. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Along with me today, my colleague Michael Williams. Thank you for being here, Michael, and thank you to Senator Graham.
Thank you, Kelly.
It's a pleasure to have you. It was during your first run for governor of Florida that you initiated your very famous work days, and one of those, in one of the very first ones, you were a teacher. What do you think about the way the education system is being run right now, thanks to some of the changes that have been made in the recent legislative session? Education was one of your top priorities as governor.
It was. It's not only the future of the children who are being educated, but it is the future of the state of Florida to have well-educated people who can contribute to the future prosperity and happiness of our state. I'm very concerned with what has just happened. We've had an 8% reduction in the per-student funding in our public schools. We've had a significant reduction in funding at our state universities and community colleges. This sends a signal that education isn't valued in our state. What I've been particularly focused on is one dimension of this, and that is civic education. That for now almost 40 years, there's been very little civics taught in our public schools. And I think many of the things that we don't like about today's American political scene, like excessive gridlock, this people saying, I love America, I hate its government, that kind of attitude is a function of the fact that people just haven't been given the opportunity to understand what it means to be a citizen in our democracy.
Senator, what about this notion that Governor Scott advanced in a recent interview with me where he said, look, listen, it's not all about money. Do you subscribe to that theory when Florida is near dead last in the nation in spending, or have we been looking in the wrong places thinking, as he believes, and as the GOP legislature believe, that we're too tied to how much money spent as a measure of quality?
I would agree it's not all about money. For instance, in this area of citizenship education, what little is left of civics is what I call spectator civics, where people are taught to sit in the auditorium and watch democracy being performed, but they don't have any of the skills to actually be part of the action. And I think democracy was never intended to be a spectator sport. So yes, there are reforms which are not monetary, but if you're going to have the quality of people in the classroom teaching that I believe our children deserve, if you're going to have class sizes that are reasonable in terms of the student-teacher relationship, if you're going to have programs like civics, like art and music, like the other things that add to the quality of a young person's education, there's a dollar sign attached.
Jobs are based on performance, jobs that we all hold. So what's wrong with tying teacher pay to student performance, as Governor Scott has decided?
I don't think there's anything wrong with holding people accountable. And when I was governor, we had a program we called it Career Ladder, where teachers would move up the ladder and eventually become similar to a university, a full professor teacher, where most of their responsibility would be to mentor the new teachers coming into the profession. So I strongly agree with that. I think evaluating a child's outcome exclusively on what happens in the classroom, however, is too narrow focus. There are a lot of other influences, family, neighborhood, health, mental health, that go into a child's development, and they ought to be part of the mix of things that are evaluated before you say it's all the teacher's responsibility.
Senator, you co-chaired the President's Commission investigating the BP oil spill. Just last week, President Obama talked about speeding up oil and gas leases, at least partly in response to Republican pressure to do so. How do you feel about that move? What are your concerns about what it may mean for offshore Florida, where you've been vociferous in your argument over many decades that you want to see no oil drilling off the Florida coast? Your assessment.
Yeah, well, the president also conditioned his statement of increasing domestic production that it has to be done in a safe and environmentally appropriate manner. which was exactly the findings of our commission. And what we found was that we are woefully behind in terms of safety of offshore drilling. Just one statistic, in the North Sea, a much more difficult environment than the Gulf of Mexico, they have 1 fatality for every 5 that we have in the Gulf of Mexico. That's how less safe our operations have been. And of course, we got a bath of that on April the 20th of last year, when a major excavation platform blew up, killed 11 people, injured lots of people, and did the greatest amount of environmental damage of any man-made incident in the history of America.
In your report, you called for dramatic changes and improvements in the government regulation and the industry standards. Is that happening, or are we close to having another one of these horrific accidents again?
Yeah, the answer is, to me, depressingly, is no, not much has happened. There have been some changes within the Department of Interior, which is the federal agency with responsibility for offshore oil and gas excavation, which I think are positive. But what hasn't happened is the Congress has not passed the laws that are going to be necessary to provide a sustained funding source to see that we can elevate and maintain a high level of safety. The industry, through our report, was asked to do what other industries that have had major accidents, such as the nuclear power industry with 3 Mile Island, and that is setting up an internal to the industry safety capability. That hasn't happened with the offshore oil companies. So I'm worried that we aren't substantially better off today than we were on April the 19th of 2010, the day before the explosion.
Senator, turning from offshore to onshore, growth management laws, which you helped champion back in the 80s and certainly supported at the federal level, have been, according to the environmental critics, rolled back to 1985 levels or before by the GOP-led legislature. Talk about your concerns as you see them in terms of what it will mean to people who are watching this broadcast and to their communities and to Florida, to our natural treasures like the Everglades in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. The irony is that it was just 40 years ago this year, 1971, that the most significant environmental incident in Florida's history occurred, and that was the fires in the Everglades. For those of you who were here, you may remember that for weeks we had heavy smoke from the Keys north of West Palm Beach, and that got people's attention that something had gone terribly wrong with the way Florida was managing its natural resources for something of that scale to have occurred. That caused Florida to enact a number of land and water management laws, to provide major funding sources to purchase things like the Big Cypress Preserve that is now an important part of the Everglades restoration effort. Much of that is now being dismantled. I'm very worried about the Everglades Restoration Program, which is a partnership, 50-50 between the state of Florida and the federal government. If either partner begins to feel that the other one is not prepared to pull their share, we could end up in the divorce court, and the Everglades will not be restored without the federal government's participation and the state of Florida's active engagement and leadership.
Governor Scott inherited a post-recession mess. We all agree with that. The housing bubble had burst, the construction industry imploded. He thinks that by cutting red tape and corporate taxes, it's going to create jobs. Do you agree with that? And if not, what will create jobs in this state?
I don't think there's much evidence that that is a plan that will get us to job creation. Here's a few numbers. In the 1980s, Florida added 195,000 jobs a year. In the 1990s, 150,000 jobs a year. In the first decade of this century, 60,000. So even though we had a state government in the early part of this century dedicated towards lower taxes and less regulation, the number of jobs created dropped dramatically. And the average per capita income of Floridians dropped dramatically. I think the key to our future is investing in, one, the thing that is our big competitive edge, which is this beautiful climate and environment. And then second, adding to that what states like North Carolina, have done, which is a very strong education system, so that people who move here, who themselves are generally well educated, and they want to know that they're coming to a community that has good education, that treasures education as an important value. So that's what I think is our future.
Well, we have much more to discuss, Senator. When we come back in just a moment, we want to talk about the death of Osama bin Laden. And here's Senator Graham's views, given his extensive experience as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Florida Senator Bob Graham served as chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee from June 2001 to January 2003. Does Osama bin Laden's death change or reduce the terrorist threat?
No. Al-Qaeda has had a long reputation of its ability to sustain losses of its leadership, but replace the fallen leader with a very competent, well-prepared individual. It was hard to believe that they haven't had the same kind of succession planning for their ultimate leader. Second, I don't believe that there's been any change in the basic objective of Al-Qaeda, which is to attack the U.S. and U.S. interest, and that every attack is larger than the previous attack. One of the reasons, I believe, the fundamental reason that we haven't been attacked since September the 11th is they haven't had access to a weapon which would give them the capability of killing more than 3,000 people. They're working hard to get that weapon.
Senator, are we better prepared in terms of Homeland Security in your estimation? Are we better prepared to avoid underestimating the potential threat, the potential next bin Laden plot?
Yeah. The answer is yes, we are better. Our Coast Guard is stronger. Certainly the security around airports is much stronger. But it has to be in the context that our opposition is not standing still and just letting us run free. They're also getting better. So we can't relax and say, well, bin Laden's gone, let's go back to pre-2001 days. We still got a very significant adversary who is committed to killing Americans, and we've got to stay vigilant to avoid that.
What did you think, though, when you heard the news? And do you think the Pakistani government knew he was living among them?
I was very relieved, and it's hard to say you're happy about somebody's death, but I would say I was happy that this man who was so evil and had killed so many people now justice had finally come. As to what did the Pakistanis know, you know, it's hard to believe that a person could be living in a very conspicuous compound in what essentially is the west point of Pakistan for 5 years, and nobody had a little curiosity as to what's going on the other side of that big fence.
Right.
Senator, you were very much immersed for so many years in the real world and the real threats, and I understand as you came in, Kelly and I were chuckling, for someone retired, you've been busy. You're telling us you're giving us the world premiere of your new book that draws in part on real world experiences, but is fiction. Give us a thumbnail view for our viewers of what your new fiction book is about here.
Yeah. The book is entitled Keys to the Kingdom.
I think we have a shot of it. There it goes, right there.
The kingdom is Saudi Arabia. It's based on fact. It's based on some incidents in which substantial amounts of money were made available to the Saudi royal family. It's based on some of the unanswered questions flowing out of 9/11. And the end result is that our young hero, who happens to be from Hialeah, Florida, and is now an intelligence officer, is given the task of trying to find nuclear bombs that have fallen into bin Laden's possession. I'm not going to go any further, but I think while it is fiction, a substantial amount of it is based on fact, and then some speculation. For instance, I speculate on what happened to bin Laden in those years between the time he left Afghanistan and was finally killed in Pakistan. What sort of transition in his personality and in his values occurred during that period of isolation.
And it'll be available June
the 7th.
June 7th.
A 5-year writing effort. We're both very impressed.
Still
and
to
some
come.
wonderful reviews, I might add.
Yeah, read the back of the book and you'll see exactly. All right, looking over a financial cliff, looking over Florida politics. We'll tackle those topics when we come back. The U.S. debt ceiling has been reached and the debate in Washington is heating up. Again, we're joined by former Senator Bob Graham. In office, you voted against both Bush tax cuts and were quite outspoken about deficits. What policies would you like to see implemented that would address this problem?
We really have two problems. The problem we have today is jobs, jobs, jobs. We have almost 1 out of 10 Americans out of work. Many people threatened with foreclosures of their homes. A lot of people have given up hope. I think that needs to be the immediate focus. But in the longer term, we've got to get control over the deficit, and it's going to require action on both the spending side and the revenue side. Yes, I did vote against those two big rounds of tax cuts because I thought we couldn't afford them, and we couldn't afford them. So I think what President Obama is trying to do and needs to continue is to elevate the discussion above just immediate cuts to the budget, to the question of what's the long-term strategy for dealing with our revenue and expenditure side of the fiscal equation.
Senator, though, do you feel the country is becoming ungovernable, where it's a poisonous atmosphere, where Republicans say no to any taxes, the caricature of Democrats is it's all about more spending, and the public seems to too many disengaged, though politicians are loath to say it? I know you've written about that as well in a nonfiction book. Speak to that.
I believe that the American people have gone through 2 generations with very little exposure to what it means to be a citizen in democracy. I took a course in high school called The Role of the Citizen in Democracy, and it taught how could you use these wonderful rights and responsibilities that we have living in this land of liberty to make life better for you, your family, your community. That has largely been lost, and we've become a nation of watchers rather than doers. So if I had to pick one place to start, it would be to bring our civics education up to the same level that it was when I graduated from Miami High in 1955.
Are we becoming ungovernable?
No. America has been a diverse country at least for the last 120 years, when the first big waves of immigration started to come from Europe. And every generation has been able to find a way to work together. I believe there are some challenges now. Some of them are in your area, the media. We all know that newspapers have been under a lot of financial pressure, and some of the first reporters to be released tend to be the ones that cover the school board and other local government agencies, so they're not getting as much coverage as they did. I think political parties have focused too much on building up their base instead of expanding the total role of citizenship. Some things that have happened in this legislature which are going to make it more difficult for people to vote.
Right.
They're cutting
early voting.
Cutting by half early voting, and now if you've changed addresses, you've got to go through a pretty bureaucratic process to be able to vote. Those aren't helpful, and there was no indication that either of those, extended early voting or people who had moved from one address to the other, was a problem in Florida. We had a solution, which was to make it more difficult to vote without a problem.
And is it going to end up hurting your party the most, the Democratic Party?
I think
Democrats
it hurts,
have had a hard time in Florida.
I think it hurts America. America is best when everybody feels they're treated fairly and can and have a responsibility to participate.
But what is the problem with Democrats in Florida right now? Why aren't they able to be elected to office? What's the undercurrent, do you think?
There's no question that the state has moved to the right, and that some of the things that Democrats have historically stood for, such as protection of the environment and more investment in education, are not as popular today as they were when I was running for office in Florida. I don't believe, however, that in the long term that Floridians have given up on this beautiful environment, have given up on their children's future, and they'll come back.
And we will come back right after we take a short break. And very quickly, before we leave, one more comment from Senator Bob Graham. How do you like retirement? How has it been since you've left the political spotlight?
My wife, Adele, says there's a nasty rumor going around that Bob Graham has retired. This has been a wonderful period of our lives. We've got 11 grandchildren that we try to spend as much time as we can. I have a policy center at the University of Florida with which I try to spend as much time as I can. I like to write. I've been chaired two and a member of one national commission, so I'm staying busy and out of trouble.
Your wife is right. You're not retired.
She's keeping them out of the house
That's
and busy.
right. Yeah, exactly. And from two Gator alumni. Good to have you with us today. Thank you very much for your time, Senator Bob Graham. We appreciate it. And thank you for spending time with us on To The Point. If you'd like to send a comment about today's show, go to WPTV.com and click on the political link. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.